Dedicated to my wife, Eddie Robinson. In 1986, Eddie Robinson, football coach at Grambling State University in Louisiana, became the winningest football coach in history when his Grambling State University Tigers beat the Prairie View A&M Panthers at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. The 27-7 win brought his career one-loss tied record to 324-106-15. With that win, Robinson broke the record of the legendary University of Alabama coach Bear Bryant, who had retired. Since Robinson himself was only 66 and had several more years to go before retirement, he had the opportunity to rack up many more wins and set a record not likely to be broken by any other coach in the foreseeable future. What's more, Eddie Robinson would retire having won all his games at a single school, a record that will probably never be broken. That particular record is due not just to the fact that Eddie Robinson never seriously considered leaving Grambling since he was offered his first coaching job there at the age of 22. It is also due to the fact of segregation. When Robinson was hired at Grambling, the only jobs available to him as a coach were at black schools, just as the only schools that had been available to him as a student had been segregated ones. Edward Gray Robinson was born on February 12, 1919 in Jackson, Louisiana, a small farming community outside of Baton Rouge where 3 generations of his family had been sharecroppers. His parents were poor, hard-working people who wanted to better themselves. When Eddie was still young, his father went on to Baton Rouge to look for a non-farm job. Eddie and his mother remained in Jackson and raised in his grandparents' house. He grew very close to his grandfather, who taught him, "There's no work too hard if it gets you what you need or where you want to go." As a youngster, Eddie helped out with the farm work as soon as he was old enough to do so. When he was 8, he and his mother joined his father in Baton Rouge, where Frank Robinson had found a steady job with Standard Oil Company. 2 years later, his parents divorced. His mother found jobs as a housekeeper, and Eddie divided his time between his mother's and father's homes. In Baton Rouge, Eddie was able to go to school more than 4 months out of the year, but he continued to work. Over the years, he picked strawberries, shined shoes, and delivered newspapers to help out his mother. He also found time to play sports. After school, he and his friends played football. They didn't have a real football, so they used a blown-up pig's bladder. Unfortunately, this did not prepare them very well to play with a real football, and when they got a chance to play against a team across town that did have a real ball, they were badly beaten. Fortunately, a player on a nearby white high school football team took an interest in them. He taught them how to block and tackle, and the next time they played the team across the town, they won. Eddie attended McKinley High School, which, to his great delight, had a football team. He starred at tailback, but played other positions as well. He also met fellow students Doris Mott when both were 13. They were sweethearts all through high school and planned to marry after they finished college. Eddie's high school football career earned him a partial scholarship as a player-coach at Leland College, a Baptist school in Baker, Louisiana. He went on recruiting trips with the coach, Reuben S. Turner, and was often left in charge of practice. On the team, he was a single swing, tailback, fullback, punter, and passer. The scholarship was not enough to cover all his college expenses, so Eddie also worked on a coal truck for 20 cents an hour and worked as the campus barber. An English major, he especially liked British 18th and 19th century poets, and even today will quote extensively from Rudyard Kipling and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. After graduation in 1941, Eddie and Doris were married, and Eddie went to work tossing grain in a Baton Rouge feed mill for 20 cents an hour. Soon they were expecting their first child, and so Eddie took a second job, evenings, unloading blocks of ice from a mule-drawn wagon and delivering them to the kitchens of private homes. There were a few jobs available to a black man with a college degree, especially the kind of job Eddie wanted, which was coaching. Fortunately, someone in Doris's family knew Ralph Waldo Emerson Jones, president of Louisiana Negro Normal and Industrial Institute in Grambling, Louisiana, about 60 miles from Shreveport. Through his family connections, Eddie arranged to have an interview. Founded in 1901 as the Colored Industrial and Agricultural School, the school had consisted of 8 buildings and had an enrollment of 320. There was no athletic department, but President Jones had big hopes for the school. He wanted it to become a full-fledged university, and he was looking for a young man who could establish its first athletic department. Years later, Robinson called that interview. The talk rambled on to baseball, and I admitted I was one heck of a hitter. Dr. Jones said he was the best pitcher these parts had ever seen. I said I could hit any pitcher I faced. He said, "Let's go get a mitt and we'll see." Went outside. His brief warm-up told me the man could throw. But I could hit. Suddenly I remembered it was a job I was after. I went down swinging on 3 straight pitches and got the job. At age 22, Robinson was probably the youngest coach in America. He was without a doubt the busiest. As the one-man athletic department, he coached not just football but also baseball and both men's and women's basketball. His one assistant was the school's night watchman. Robinson mowed the football field, sewed torn uniforms, and taped the players' ankles. He drilled the cheerleaders, directed the band, and even wrote the game accounts for the local newspapers. His budget was $64 a year. His salary was not much larger. The job did come with a place to live, and Eddie and Doris Robinson moved into an old, weather-beaten house with no electricity, running water, or indoor toilet. Coach Robinson's first year at the college was not memorable. The team posted a 3-5 record, playing home games on a field that had no bleachers, so fans had to stand. The cheerleaders had a hard time coming up with cheers using the school's long and rather awkward name. Recalled Robinson, "Used to be, when the other team was down at our goal line, our students would yell, 'Hold that line, Louisiana Negro Normal and Industrial Institute.' Before they could finish their cheer, the other guys would score. Everyone was grateful when Dr. Jones changed the name of the school to Grambling College in 1946. It became Grambling State University in 1974. By the 1942 season, Eddie Robinson had had a chance to shape up his football team. He had also started an ambitious recruiting drive, traveling to black high schools across the state to watch games and invite players he was interested in to attend Grambling. He couldn't offer them much in the way of scholarships, but he could promise them a good education and excellent training in football. From the start, he stressed that his athletes would be well-rounded young men who did their schoolwork and did not miss classes. Every weekday morning at 6 o'clock, he roused his athletes with an old wooden-handled school bell to make sure they ate a proper breakfast and got to their early classes on time. Grambling had a record of 9-0 in Robinson's second year. In the early years, the football seasons were short. College football was as segregated as other areas of American life. Black teams could play only other black teams. Eddie Robinson groomed his athletes as if they would be playing against the top teams in college. And as the years wore on, he was certain they could hold their own against any team. They just never got a chance to prove it. Sometimes it was hard to motivate his athletes, for there were no opportunities for them to play college after football. There were no opportunities for them to play football after college. Professional football was still pretty much closed to blacks, and until 1949, no football player from a black college had ever made it to the National Football League. In the late 1940s, Paul "Tank" Younger, Grambling star fullback, piled up 60 touchdowns for the Tigers. Grambling was still pretty much unknown at that time, but a scout from the Los Angeles Rams heard about Younger and came to Grambling to see him. The scout was impressed, but concerned about Younger's ability to perform in the NFL, which he reminded Robinson had never before signed a player from a black school. Coach Robinson told the scout that Younger was not a fullback, but an American fullback, and was better than any fullback from the bigger colleges. The Rams took a chance and signed Younger for a top rookie pay. Younger went on to compile a distinguished record in the pros, and today is assistant general manager of the San Diego Chargers. Says he of Robinson, "Eddie had a game plan for your life, not just Saturday." Once Younger showed what kind of quality football players Grambling was capable of turning out, the ice was broken in the NFL. Since 1949, Robinson had sent more than 200 players into the National Football League. He also sent a number of players in the short-lived United States Football League, USFL. The reluctance of the pro leagues was not the only type of discrimination Eddie Robinson and his teams had to contend with in the early days. They also faced a good many problems on the road. Allowed to play only teams from other black colleges, the team was required to travel by bus across the South. And in the 1940s, 50s, and early 60s, that meant meeting segregation at every turn. Once they boarded the rickety old team bus, which was nicknamed Old Blue Bird, they had to drive until they reached their destination. No white restaurants along the way would serve them unless they were willing to get takeout food from the back door. White service stations would allow the bus to fill up the gas, but would not allow the players to use the bathrooms. Sometimes when traveling, the team was even unable to find a field on which to practice. That happened once in Montgomery, Alabama, where the opposing team, Alabama State, did not have its own football field and instead used a town field. Denied the use of the football field to work out on the day before the game, Eddie Robinson had the bus stop in an empty parking lot and held a practice there. Conditions were not much better on the Grambling campus, where there was no money to plant new grass on the football field. For years, the Tigers practiced and played on dirt. In spite of these hardships, the Grambling football team thrived, and not just as players, but as young men. Early on, Robinson established the tradition that incoming freshmen had to give a speech to the team about where they came from and something about their background. Very few were skilled at public speaking, and so Coach Robinson asked for and got a special course in social etiquette. Not only did his course teach his players how to speak properly, but it also taught them how to shake hands, how to enter and leave a room, and how to hold a knife and fork properly. He insisted that his players wear coats and ties to away games. He always wore a coat and tie to games both at home and away. In the days when Grambling games were not covered in the national press and Grambling players had little reason to be poised and articulate for reporters, Eddie Robinson had them prepared to give interviews in front of a national audience. He often said, "I want to see to it that every guy gets the opportunity to be the best man he can be." He was like a father to his players. They came to him with their family and romance problems, and he always had the time to listen to them and offer advice. Many credit him with whatever success they have achieved in life, whether in football or in other areas. Some went on to careers in law and medicine and other professions and attributed their success to Robinson's stress on the basics of discipline and hard work. It is to Robinson's credit that more than 80% of Grambling players have graduated, a much higher percentage than at most colleges. Each fall it became the custom for players who had graduated to return to Grambling to help Coach Robinson in preseason practice. Others kept in touch through phone calls and letters and frequent visits. While Robinson had 2 children of his own, a son and daughter, at times it seemed as if he had hundreds of other sons as well. Robinson's former players considered themselves a special group, and the mystique of playing at Grambling, although confined mostly to the southern black community, was important to the coach's recruiting. This was especially important after the civil rights movement began to open up more opportunities for blacks to go to college. A variety of legal suits against segregated higher education in the South forced southern states, universities to admit black students. Colleges in the North also started recruiting more black athletes. All these colleges and universities had more scholarship money and better athletic facilities to offer than did Grambling. Eddie Robinson realized the school had to change with the times. Eddie Robinson had always been flexible and willing to make changes when they were needed. The idea that a man who stays in the same job year after year gets stuck in his ways and doesn't have imagination does not hold in the case of Robinson. From the first time, he was willing to change his plays on the field when necessary, with the result that both of his offensive and defensive arsenals are huge. His players were prepared to change tactics at a moment's notice, making them more flexible than many other teams. He also introduced innovation in the field. In the old days, the players were not given drinking water during a game. Robinson introduced drinking water onto the field before other coaches did. Now, water is always available to football players during a game. When we saw that changing racial and social conditions were opening up more opportunities for black athletes, Robinson decided that Grambling's athletic program had to change its focus and think bigger than it ever had before. In 1965, with President Jones and Collie J. Nicholson, Grambling's publicist, he took a long, hard look at Grambling. The college was still so small that it did not have a large alumni base to give it money. It still lacked a decent home stadium. To overcome these obstacles, the three decided that Grambling had to have a national black collegiate team. Only in this way could it attract the publicity and support needed to keep top high school players coming and to raise money for better athletic facilities. Nicholson started sending out press releases about the team twice a week to national newspapers and magazines. President Jones and Coach Robinson put out the word that the Tigers were interested in playing exhibition games in big stadiums. They got their first big exhibition game in 1968. On September 28, the Yankee Stadium in New York, the Grambling Tigers played Morgan State of Baltimore, Maryland in front of more than 60,000 fans, most of them black. Grambling lost 9-7, but they were proud of the way they played and pleased with the chance to show what they could do. Over the next few years, the team played in Los Angeles, Cleveland, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Houston, Dallas, Kansas City, and other major cities, each time to huge, predominantly black crowds. The team made money from these games and used it to increase the entertainment value of the games. Grambling's band became a marvel of intricate, synchronized movements, and the halftime show became worthy of attendance itself. Television networks started picking up the games, bringing in more revenue and more publicity for Grambling. Eddie Robinson called the Tigers a gypsy team with a floating schedule, willing to play anybody, anywhere if the terms were right. Some observers likened the Tigers to the Harlem Globetrotters basketball team, which plays exhibition games around the world. Grambling reached international status in 1976 when the team and the band visited Japan and played an exhibition game against Morgan State. But perhaps a bigger milestone for Robinson had come 2 years earlier when the team had played a regular season game in the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans. Robinson remarked at the time that the event meant a lot to him than it did to the other players, because he remembered a time when blacks could not even sit in the Sugar Bowl, let alone play in it. With national renown came talk that Eddie Robinson might be recruited to coach a larger school or even in the pros. But Robinson had no interest in going anywhere else and never seriously entertained any outside offers. He realized he could make more money elsewhere, and he would have enjoyed having extra money for recruiting players. But in the end, he felt he owed his success to Grambling and could not imagine leaving either it or the team. Robinson's loyalty to the Grambling Tigers was echoed in the loyalty of black football players to the school. Although the Tigers had a white backup quarterback named James Gregory in 1968, and the school has a small percentage of white students, it remains predominantly black. It still attracts some of the best high school players, some of whom turn down lucrative scholarship offers from big schools in favor of Grambling. While the Grambling teams of the 1960s are judged to have been the best in the school's history, in 1960 the defensive team featured 4 All-Pros. Grambling had more winning teams since integration began than during the era of segregation. According to the Sports Illustrated magazine, from 1952 to 1972, the Tigers won 73% of their games, while between 1973 and 1982 they won almost 80%. More than anything else, this success was due to Eddie Robinson. By 1982, after 41 years at Grambling, Coach Robinson was approaching the kinds of records that they have been won by only a few great coaches. Late September, an upcoming game against Florida A&M, a predominantly black college, loomed as his 300th win. The Florida fans at Bragg Memorial Stadium chanted, "Not in Tallahassee, Eddie, not in Tallahassee." The game was tied 14-14 at halftime, and by the beginning of the fourth quarter, the Tigers had fallen behind 21-14. The team was worried, but not the coach. "All we have to do is shorter," he said, and in the next 5 minutes, wingback Trumaine Johnson scored 3 times, leading the Tigers with a 3-0 season record to win a 43-21 win for their coach. Without shame, Eddie Robinson cried, "I'm a crier," he explained. "I can't hold it back. I owe so much to so many. We came back, showed the character you need in life. With work, you can make outstanding people out of ordinary guys." With that win, Robinson joined a very exclusive club as the 4th coach in history to have 300 or more wins. Still ahead of him were Bear Bryant of the University of Alabama with 318 and Amos Alonzo Stagg of the University of Chicago with 314. And Glenn Scobie Pop Warner, who had coached at 7 colleges with 313. Robinson was not only the one member of the 300th Club who had earned all his victories at one college, he was also the only black in the club. Bear Bryant was due to retire soon, and since Robinson was just 63, there was every reason to believe that he would surpass them all. That put a lot of pressure on Eddie Robinson. He did his best not to let that pressure affect him. A few years earlier, he had let winning become too important. He had taken losing too hard. Finally, his wife, Doris, had suggested that if he didn't cool it, he would have a heart attack. He calmed down after that. Fortunately, there were far more wins than losses. At the end of the fall of 1982, Grambling and Robinson could claim 23 straight winning seasons. The following year, Grambling's brand new campus stadium opened. A huge marker at the entrance proclaimed, "Robinson Stadium, where everybody is somebody." Its seating capacity was 27,000, and there were plans to expand that to 43,000, where additional money was raised. Grambling now had a student population of 4,500, nearly every one of whom would be at the stadium for every game. The college and the team had come a long way since 1941. So had the state of Louisiana, which had paid the bulk of the $7.5 million cost of the new stadium. But the South was still the South, and as Eddie Robinson approached Bear Bryant's record, much pressure was placed on him, including the questioning of his own early record at Grambling. Whenever a sports record is about to be broken, outside observers take sides. In no case is this more true than when a black threatens a record held by a white. Some people began to question the records of the Tigers between 1941 and 1949, when Grambling did not keep careful statistics. A school with one-man athletic department who mowed the grass and drew the white lines in the field was not going to be very careful about keeping athletic records. The problem was compounded that back in the early 1960s, Grambling's president began joking that Grambling Tigers in Robinson's first year had had a record of 0-8, while in the second season it was 9-0. Johnson was trying to make the coach's second season record seem even more impressive, but Grambling press guides and sports writers had picked up this quote and reported it. The National Collegiate Athletic Association, however, insisted that the correct record was 3-5. Others complained that the more than 300 Robinson's victories had come against small college teams, while Bryant's had come against big school teams. The two men themselves had nothing but respect for each other and had known each other for years. Back in his early days as coach, Eddie Robinson had attended every Bear Bryant football clinic he could. In 1982, Bryant had presented Robinson with the Walter Camp Foundation's 1982 Distinguished American Award. When Bryant died in 1983, Robinson could not get a flight, so he drove 400 miles through the night to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, to attend the funeral. "I could win 1,000 games and never replace the Bear," he said. His one regret was that his Grambling Tigers and the Crimson Tide of Alabama had never met on the field. What a match that would have been. But a small college team like Grambling would never be matched up with a big school team on a regular NCAA schedule. And no exhibition game between the schools was ever held, in large measure because of the racial issues involved. By the fall of 1985, Eddie Robinson had matched Bear Bryant's final record of 323 wins. The upcoming game against Prairie View A&M on Saturday, October 12, could result in the magic win number of 324. Although the potential for Bryant fans to be sore-headed was there, Robinson did not receive a single hate letter. Dozens of former Grambling players were at the Cotton Bowl for the big game, including Tank Younger, Hall of Famer Willie Davis, and Doug Williams, the most successful black quarterback in the history of the NFL. The president of Grambling at the time, Dr. Joseph B. Johnson, had years earlier been recruited for the football team by Robinson. They were not disappointed. Grambling scored on its first and third possessions to go ahead 14-0 and by halftime had a 20-0 lead. The final score was 27-7, a commanding 324th win for the winningest coach in football history. Eddie Robinson cried after that game too. "Let it out, coach," shouted his players, and he did. But he insisted, the real record is 44 years at one school, one job, and one wife. The real record was also working within the system of segregation that was in place for so many of Coach Robinson's years at Grambling. "I grew up in the South," he said. "I was told where to attend elementary school, where to attend junior high school, where to attend high school. When I became a coach, I was told who I could recruit, who I could play, and when I could play, I did what I could within the system." Asked how he wanted to be remembered, Robinson said, "I always knew my part to play, and if my part ended up having something to do with history, then I'm happy. I never let anybody change my faith in this country. All I want is for my story to be an American story. Not black and white, just American. I want it to belong to everybody."